Okay,
All right.
good.
Thanks. Good afternoon and welcome to Transforming Brownfields, a path towards environmental and social justice. I'm Colette Santasiri, Executive Director of the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. The New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center, along with New Jersey Economic Development Authority, are proud to... Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I think you went too far. There you go. Our featured speakers in today's event are Olivia Glenn, Deputy Commissioner, Environmental Justice and Equity at the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, who will be discussing New Jersey's recent historic environmental justice legislation. Our other speakers are Mayor Hector Lora from the City of Passaic and Mayor Gusciora from the City of Trenton. They will be discussing the impacts of brownfield sites in their cities and efforts to transform them into community assets. Next slide. As mentioned, NJEDA is co-sponsoring this event, and I'm delighted that Elizabeth Limbrick, Senior Brownfields Advisor, Policy and Communications at NJEDA, will also give us a quick overview of New Jersey EDA's efforts towards reclaiming brownfield sites. Next slide. So to put this discussion in context, let's start with the definition of a brownfield. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency defines a brownfield as a property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. Similarly, New Jersey state law defines a brownfield as any former or current commercial or industrial site that is currently vacant or underutilized and on which there has been or there is suspected to have been a discharge of a contaminant. New Jersey was a prominent leader in the industrialization of the United States. Our cities and small towns alike contributed to industrial productivity. But when New Jersey experienced an economic shift and urban exodus beginning in the mid-1950s, industries, factories, warehouses, mills, and rail yards that were once part of our state's economic and historic fabric either moved out of state or became obsolete. Abandoned industrial sites, as well as soil and water contamination, remained. These sites, as I mentioned, are brownfield sites, and they're a byproduct of our industrial legacy. Additionally, closed gas stations and dry cleaners and other vacant commercial properties are also brownfields. Environmental justice and brownfields go hand in hand. Brownfields are overwhelmingly concentrated in low-income, marginalized communities. Brownfields are inseparable from issues of social inequity, racial discrimination, and urban decay. New Jersey has always been a state of immense opportunities, and while these industrial legacy and commercial sites sometimes plague our communities, the cleanup and redevelopment of brownfields presents us with unique opportunities. Opportunities to spur economic development, generate jobs, reduce sprawl, and develop community-needed land uses such as housing, healthcare facilities, recreational space, urban agriculture, just to name a few. Next slide. Unfortunately, many local governments do not have the in-house knowledge or expertise to advance brownfield sites through the cleanup and redevelopment processes. Many communities have either no or limited resources, including funding. These challenges are sometimes compounded by weak real estate markets being experienced by many of our communities. And the process of cleaning up and redeveloping a brownfield site can be complicated. That's why we created the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center at NJIT, to help communities overcome their brownfields challenges. We provide free technical assistance to New Jersey counties and municipalities. Our team of planners, engineers, environmental scientists, and social scientists brings tools, strategies, resources, partnerships, subject matter experts, and education to brownfield challenged communities to help them transform these sites into community assets. Please contact us to discuss how we may assist you. Next slide. It is my pleasure now to introduce Elizabeth Limbrick, the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. Elizabeth?
Oh, thank you very much, Colette. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing at NJEDA and how that ties in with the environmental justice movement. So really, inclusive and equitable development strategies are the cornerstone of the Murphy administration, and really what we do at NJEDA. This is maybe a little bit of a newer space for us, getting involved in these kinds of issues, but it's really important. A resilient New Jersey really requires innovation and smart planning solutions that are going to be tailored to the very specific needs of communities and their priorities and their visions for the future, and what the residents in that community want and need. And this really ties in with so many things we're doing at EDA. We recognize environmental sustainability, environmental justice, and economic prosperity are really interdependent and mutually reinforcing ideas. We're really working to create an equitable environment and economic well-being for everyone. And we recognize really that brownfields are a great lever for doing that. And by addressing environmental, social, and economic justice issues, we're using holistic, integrated approaches, and we're able to really foster these thriving and inclusive communities. And by prioritizing brownfield redevelopment and sustainable policies, we're able to get money into distressed communities. And this has always been important, but it's even more important now. We've never had a brownfield coordinator before. This is a position that was created about a year ago. We're really, again, kind of painting with a broader brush, actively engaged with Governor Murphy's plan, and just really much more interested in these programs. So now we have a brownfield program, and it's a robust program, and I'm going to tell you about that on our next slide. So I guess, go ahead and move to the next slide. So here are some of the initiatives. First of all, we're working with other agencies like we never have before. I am actively engaged with the Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency, the Department of Environmental Protection, the Department of Community Affairs, the New Jersey Redevelopment Agency. We're doing so many things, working with small businesses, local county partners, and bringing technical assistance to build capacity, because we really want to work with the communities to create solutions that are viable and sustainable. So I wanted to mention on environmental justice, this is something that's really being led by the front from DEP, and you're going to hear from Deputy Commissioner Olivia Glenn. And they're creating a framework for all of the state agencies, including EDA, to really look at how we can improve conditions for environmental justice communities. And we're working with the guidance of DEP to create first an initial assessment to look at our programs, and then we're going to be developing an action plan so that we really can do that work to improve those conditions for environmental justice communities. Similarly, on the climate resilience front, we're working with DEP's Climate Resiliency Office. And I really think, by the way, when you talk about both of those issues, you really can't talk about one without the other. And then I did want to highlight another program we've been working on under the leadership of Governor Murphy, which is the NJDEP's Community Collaborative Initiative. And this is a really fantastic program, and we see the value in it. And because of that, we're actually supporting this initiative with some of our funds as well. And this program embeds staff from DEP in 12 targeted communities where multiple environmental stressors exist. And it allows a DEP staff person to be embedded in that community, and then they can really develop those relationships, foster that communication, and develop the insights necessary to open the pathways to successful remediation and redevelopment. And I guess I'll go ahead and list them for you here. Bayonne, Bridgeton, Camden, Jersey City, Millville, Newark, Trenton, Patterson, Paulsboro, Perth Amboy, Salem City, and Vineland. And then I also wanted to mention, Colette Santasiri, who is on here, who's the executive director of the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, or NJIT, in Newark. This is also another way that we're supporting programs to really help build that capacity in the public sector. So this is a brand new initiative launched earlier this year, and they provide the public sector with the tools and resources necessary to reclaim and redevelop brownfields, and all the assistance they provide is free. So if you're in the public sector, I highly recommend that you reach out to the New Jersey Brownfield Assistance Center, and they helped pull together this webinar and a series of webinars as well. that you're going to hear about. We'll do some more in the future. We are also at EDA, just so you guys are aware, we're applying for an EPA assessment grant that goes in a couple days. We're really excited about that. It's competitive. We won't know till the spring whether or not we're selected. And then we were actually just selected in the past round with EPA to get a revolving loan fund from EPA, and we're developing that program right now. And then lastly, this is the big program I really want to focus on, is a brand new brownfield loan program that we should have probably launching in January 2021, somewhere thereabouts. Next slide. So this is a little bit of the details on this program. But it's a really great program. It's going to provide low interest loans for brownfield. We call it remediation, but really it runs the gamut from assessment through remediation. And so what's also exciting about it is that it doesn't just provide funds for what I would call the traditional environmental investigation and cleanup, but also for things like demolition, asbestos and lead-based paint remediation, things like that, where you really are hard pressed to find other sources. So between that and the favorable terms that we've put together for this program, really thinking about how brownfields work, I think you're going to find it is going to be a really great program to stimulate brownfield redevelopment. The loan amounts will range. The minimum is $100,000. The maximum is $5 million. And we have a $15 million pot of funds. It is competitive, so you'll have to apply basically for access to those funds. Again, the favorable terms, 10 years, no payments at all in the first 2 years, and then interest only for the following 2 years. We have a base rate of 3%, but where you intersect with certain other priority programs, we can offer rate reductions as well. So things along the lines of affordable housing, certain things associated with healthcare and food deserts and electric vehicle charging stations. We have more information on our website, which is listed here, and we also have an email address. Next slide. I am going to I just have to take a moment to tell you about this. This is not specifically brownfield related, but it's really important. So many businesses have been affected by COVID-19, just about, really every business. And we are offering a new grant program. It's called our Phase 3 grant program. We have $70 million. And I just want to point out that the big things here are that you have to pre-register by close of business tomorrow if you want to get one of these grants. And yes, they're grants, which means you don't have to pay them back. Just about any business in New Jersey is eligible that has up to 50 full-time equivalents. We're really targeting those hardest hit, which is restaurants and micro businesses and businesses in historically disadvantaged communities. But after you pre-register, which again, you must do by 5 p.m. tomorrow, depending on which of those buckets you fall into, whether it's a restaurant, a micro business, or other applicants, you can see on this slide, we have different dates for the actual application. The application will be on a first come, first served basis. So first pre-register, then make sure you're back in at the appointed time, because we do expect this to be oversubscribed. And next slide. I also wanted to briefly mention, because this webinar is with folks who are familiar with environmental issues. A lot of you probably are familiar with what PPE is. PPE, of course, is a critical element to staying open, reopening, and this is another program we're rolling out. I would encourage you to go to the website that's listed on here. We're putting together 2 different phases, but in the first phase, we're going to have a tool that helps folks plan for their PPE needs, and it's going to give a guaranteed discount of 10%. And then in the second phase, which we're also still working on right now, but should be up in sometime next month, we're going to actually provide a grant to subsidize the purchase of the PPE as well. So with that, I want to turn it over to Olivia Glenn, who is the Deputy Commissioner of NJDEP. She was recently appointed to this position, but she has been a long-standing advocate of environmental justice and making sure communities have access to the outdoors and that every New Jerseyan has the right to experience and enjoy the benefits of nature. She's had a lot of other posts, some within DEP, at the Division of Parks and Forestry. She led that division. She's also worked in urban initiatives and as an outreach coordinator. And she's been a member of the Environmental Justice Advisory Council, or EJAC. So with that, let me turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Glenn.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much to the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center and to the EDA for inviting me to speak today. As the Deputy Commissioner for Environmental Justice and Equity at the Department of Environmental Protection, I directly supervise the offices of Environmental Justice, Diversity, Inclusion, and Outreach, Equal Employment Opportunity and Public Contract Assistance, and Environmental Education. I also chair the steering committee of the Community Collaborative Initiative. As Elizabeth mentioned, we work very closely with the EDA in implementing the Community Collaborative Initiative. And it was largely due to EDA support that we were able to expand from 4 to 12 municipalities with their support. We deeply value our collaborative relationship with the EDA for the benefit of all of the communities that we serve. Outside of these individual offices and programs, I am proud to lead the DEP's overall efforts to aid overburdened communities throughout New Jersey and to bolster diversity, equity, and inclusion in all of DEP's programs. This good work that we're doing internally, we hope will spread throughout government as well as to our non-governmental collaborations. Under the leadership of Governor Murphy and Commissioner Catherine McCabe, we have made great strides in advancing environmental justice goals. So why does environmental justice matter? Since the civil rights movement of the 1960s, grassroots communities nationwide have documented disproportionate environmental burdens endured by poor communities and communities of color. These disparities were not only raised in urban centers, but also in rural communities. And New Jersey is no exception. From our industrialized urban centers to rural migrant farming communities, these concerns have been present from every end of the Garden State. For decades, nationwide stories from communities and academic research institutions have documented these disparities. Specifically, these communities and their studies have shown a disproportionate quantity of minority and poor communities host potentially toxic facilities, such as landfills, incinerators, and other waste disposal entities. And it's not just disproportionate exposure, it is also not balanced with the level of consumption by these impacted communities. A 2019 study that was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found a racial gap between who causes air pollution and who breathes it. Specifically, that study found that African Americans and Hispanics experience 56% and 63% respectively more air pollution than they produce through consumption. This is in comparison to whites who experience 17% less air pollution than they produce through consumption. These disparities are not limited to air quality and facility siting. These disparities are also present in climate change impacts, water infrastructure, flooding, brownfields, and reflected in land use and planning policies. On the ground in communities across our state and nation, one experiences a confluence of social issues which have documented connection to manifested past practices that were clearly embedded in racial injustice, such as redlining and housing and zoning, and the siting of highways, and the consequential bifurcation of communities in the 1950s and 1960s. These environmental conditions and limited mobility contribute to disparate negative public health outcomes, such as elevated blood lead levels, asthma, cancer, cardiovascular disease, and developmental problems in overburdened communities. Environmental injustices did not happen overnight through the course of one decision or one administration at any level of government. It's been decades in the making. And the solutions to this also are not one-dimensional, one permit, or one project. It will take all of us working together to reset the course for the improvement of quality of life in all of our communities. And the approaches it will take to remedy this undoubtedly require targeted, intentional, inward, and individual efforts within departments and agencies, as well as outward and concerted efforts between departments and agencies at all levels of government with the communities we serve. They will take coordinated efforts of government at all levels to reduce stressors and increase benefits in impacted communities. And we need our nonprofit and business and industries to join us in this effort. Like the federal government, New Jersey and other states have taken steps over decades outside of legislation. In New Jersey, we launched our governmental environmental justice efforts during the Shin administration with an environmental equity task force back in 1998, and subsequent executive orders and administrative orders with governors and commissioners since then. While all of these efforts have been admirable, no environmental justice community in the nation had statewide legislation that could preclude, mitigate, or remedy some of these environmental justice challenges. But on September 18th, New Jersey became the first state in the nation to take a critical first step via legislation to advance environmental justice. The law is the nation's strongest measure to protect overburdened communities from pollutants. So what exactly does this law do? This new law requires DEP to evaluate the environmental and public health impacts of certain facilities on overburdened communities when reviewing certain permit applications, such as major sources of air pollution like gas-fired power plants and cogeneration facilities, resource recovery facilities or incinerators, transfer stations or solid waste facilities, and scrap metal facilities, just to name a few. The law goes into effect immediately upon the adoption of rules and regulations. And at that time, the department shall not consider complete for review any application for a permit for a new facility or for the expansion of an existing facility, or any application for the renewal of an existing facility's major source permit if that facility is located or proposed to be located in whole or in part in an overburdened community, unless that permit applicant first prepares an environmental justice impact statement that assesses the potential environmental and public health stressors associated with that facility's application and the stressors already borne by the community as a result of existing conditions in that community. That applicant must then organize and conduct a public hearing in that overburdened community. And after having that public hearing, the DEP shall consider public testimony presented, any written comments received, and evaluate everything to determine if the permit is necessary, if there's any way to avoid or reduce adverse stressors on that community. If it's a new facility, the department may deny a permit if it is determined to cause or contribute to adverse cumulative environmental or public health stressors in that overburdened community that are higher than those borne by other surrounding communities. The only exception to that is if DEP determines that this new facility serves a compelling public interest in the community where it is to be located. And then the department may grant a permit that imposes conditions on the construction and operation of that facility to protect public health. And as already noted, to advance this law, rulemaking must be completed. We just held our first public information meeting last week, and we were joined by over 150 attendees, ranging from individuals, environmental justice advocates, representatives from business and industry, all levels of government, environmental organizations, and social organizations like the NAACP. What we believe is that this bill represents, now it's a law, it's not a bill anymore, this law represents the rectifying of the burden on marginalized communities, and that responsible businesses can use this change as an opportunity to thrive and grow with their neighbors. It's imperative that we stand up for underserved communities, those that shoulder more than their fair share of pollution and environmental hazards, those whose residents suffer significantly higher incidences of asthma and other respiratory illnesses, and those that have limited access to open space and nature. So in addition to the environmental justice law, and Elizabeth alluded to a little bit of this, is Governor Murphy issued an executive order, is specifically 23, Executive Order 23, in his first 100 days in office. And that executive order directed all executive branch departments, agencies, boards, councils, and commissions to consider environmental justice in its statutory and regulatory obligations. And to implement this, the executive order directed DEP to create a guidance document and to launch an environmental justice interagency council. On October 1st of this year, DEP issued this document, and it is titled Furthering the Promise, a guidance document for advancing environmental justice across state government. We look forward to hosting our first interagency council meeting next week. The work of the interagency council will produce initial assessments, trainings, workshops, and work groups, followed by action plans for the executive branch departments and agencies. Those action plans will set milestones by which we can decrease environmental and public health stressors, and very importantly, increase environmental and public health benefits in overburdened communities. And there's no doubt that anything dealing with brownfields revitalization meets those milestones. Through this process of working together as an interagency council, we will also identify key initiatives that we can advance collectively to bring needed relief to New Jersey's environmental justice communities. And we all know that in impacted communities, they don't see their issues from the lens of one department versus another. They see the issue and they want government to respond. So this interagency council is going to give us an opportunity to tear down those silos and do more work together, which really builds upon the work that we've been doing with EDA for quite some time, working together through the Community Collaborative Initiative. It's going to expand on those efforts and many programs across all of state government. Bringing environmental justice to overburdened communities has many advantages. It gives greater voice to such communities, and it furthers the promise of environmental justice by amplifying all voices. I have many more things I could share with you in terms of our department's commitment to environmental justice, but I want to be mindful of the time and sharing the platform with others that are here today. So thank you so much. I look forward to talking any more later on in questions about the law, about the guidance document, and about the CCI program. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. We're so honored to have you here today. So it is now my honor to introduce our distinguished mayors. And mayors, if you want to put your video cameras on and unmute yourselves, that would be great. Mayor Hector Lora of the City of Passaic and Mayor Reed Gusciora of the City of Trenton. Hector Lora was elected in his hometown of Passaic as a councilman in 2011, and then elected twice as a Passaic County freeholder. In 2015, Mr. Lora became the first American Latino and first American of Dominican heritage to become the director of the Passaic County Board of Chosen Freeholders. He has served as mayor since 2016. Reed Gusciora was sworn in as the 48th mayor of the City of Trenton on July 1st, 2018. Prior to becoming mayor, he served in the New Jersey General Assembly since 1996, representing the 15th district, legislative district, which includes portions of Mercer and Hudson counties. In the Assembly, he was Deputy Majority Leader and, over the course of his tenure, served as Chair of the Assembly Commerce and Economic Development, Environment and Solid Waste, and Regulatory Oversight and Federal Relations Committees. Mayors, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here. I also was born in Passaic.
Oh, great. We're bringing it full circle here.
Yeah.
So my apologies again for us starting a little late, and I'm hoping that, you know, if we go past 3 o'clock that you're both able to stay on the line. So I have a few questions I'd like to pose to you, and our roundtable discussion really centers on the central theme of how cleaned up and redeveloped brownfield sites can help communities be more environmentally and socially just. And earlier I had said what the definition of a brownfield site is, as any former industrial or commercial site that's vacant or underutilized, in which there's either contamination or perception of contamination. And because of that, a lot of these sites have languished, have just remained unused for years and sometimes decades. So my first question to you both is, how have these properties contributed to environmental injustice and social inequity in your city? And Mayor Gusciora, if you'd like to start off, that would be great. Talk about Trenton.
Well, thanks so much, Colette. The old adage that Trenton makes, the world takes, used to be Trenton makes pollution. We were front and center in the Industrial Revolution, where we had the Roebling factories that produced the cable wires for the Brooklyn Bridge and other industrial uses. I learned about environmental injustice when the county proposed to put in a garbage incinerator, and they tell you don't put an incinerator in two places, near water or near a population center, and they wanted to do both and put it along the Delaware in Trenton. So that's was the first fight that we had, and luckily we fought them off. But the Roebling factories, once they became into disuse, it's been a challenge to repurpose them because one of the industrial waste that was underneath them, but also that if a new prospective developer came in, they would have to deal with hazardous waste potential and just working in the city environment when it's a lot easier to plow a cornfield in West Windsor. So we have that challenge unless we get the proper funding, and we do get the funding from the state. The state has been very generous with us, both from DEP and other agencies to clean up these sites. But it's always a challenge attracting redevelopers to come back to repurpose these old industrial cities. One thing that we did do when I worked on the legislature was our old Magic Marker site. Before it was Magic Marker, it was a battery factory, and you literally had to wear a spacesuit to walk on the property. That site was cleaned up, and now I'm happy to say there's 42 residential units on top of it. So there is hope for urban areas. There is an ability to repurpose these sites, but it takes a lot of concerted effort, and it takes a lot of funding. And again, normally it would be much easier just to plow down a cornfield. And we don't want to do that as a state either, because we're the garden state.
Oh, thank you. So Mayor Lora, would you like to talk about your city and how these properties have contributed to environmental injustice and social inequity?
Sure. I just want to make sure you can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you. We
had a little bit of technical difficulty connecting earlier, so I'm not sure if the camera's working, and we're trying to work it through. But I wanted to share that obviously it's a privilege and an honor to be with you and to discuss Brownfields and the impact that it has on communities like ours. Much like Mayor Reed, in the city of Passaic, obviously in the 80s, which predated my term, there was a similar fight with an incinerator that was proposed in the city of Passaic. And equally, same objections that we had, and thank God for remarkable leaders. I recall the recent passing of former Councilman Gill, who was instrumental in fighting against it, stood up strong because of the impact that it would have in our communities. I think it's been mentioned that communities like mine, as well as Mayor Reed, that we disproportionately have environmental burdens. And, you know, it's difficult when I consider the challenges. The city of Passaic is an older industrial city with rich history of industry. Its growth in the late 19th and 20th century resulted in many manufacturing pursuits. Many of them were located in our east side of the city, which was adjacent to the Passaic River. The challenge that we have is with these pursuits, with these industries, many chemical, I remember Panasol with rubber. It provides job opportunities, but again, the adverse impact on communities like ours, especially when you consider our demographics, when individuals in the community are often more worried about whether they're going to have a meal on the table, they're not as socially educated, as environmentally up to date, so they don't often come together to fight against these adverse effects. And in the area of our city, which was home to such an immigrant population, which remains similar today, the pollution that lingered for over a century and over just the last several decades, we've been able to make or over the last several decades, we were able to make strides, but it wasn't the #1 topic in communities like ours. And I'm so grateful to the fact that we have a governor, that we have legislators, that we have individuals in positions of influence that are bringing these issues to the forefront, that because of access to social media, because of campaigns, young people in our schools and even those who formerly weren't as interested in the impact that it would have on communities like ours are more educated and are willing to raise their voice. But if not for individuals who are willing to amplify those voices, they would go unheard. I would say that considering within our city, the impact was extremely difficult in terms of the blight that it creates in communities like ours. These areas discourage investors when they consider the kind of money that they have to put in to remediate environmental concerns. Those areas in communities like mine become conducive for crime, for homelessness, obviously for more conduct or things that occur in the area and surrounding areas. It impacts property values and just the way people feel. So I think that the impact is so adverse, so negative in communities like ours that there's no argument as to why we need to push for legislation that has recently passed, for more education and to hold individual industry accountable to ensure that they're partners in making sure that communities like mine that was so adversely impacted by contamination, by these environmental burdens, not only on individuals, but on property in the community as a whole, can come back. Hopefully that's short. I'm trying to be a little succinct as I work on the camera.
That's great, Mayor. Thank you so much. So I had mentioned earlier that, transforming brownfield sites into community needed land uses such as housing and economic development and job generators and open space, those are all speak to issues of social equity. So Mayor Gusciora, you mentioned Magic Marker site. Can you expand a little bit more about that site or any other site within Trenton where the brownfield site has been cleaned up and has been redeveloped, and because of that, now that neighborhood or the city in general is more socially equitable? Can you give us a little description of some of those brownfield sites that have been transformed?
Sure. They tend to be attractive nuisances for neighborhood gangs and drug dealing and the like. And as long as the buildings are not in use and in decay, they'll be used for a lot of squatting and illegal activity that occurs. So it is truly the definition of urban blight. We also had a problem when we were with the Schools Development Authority, and they were rebuilding our Martin Luther King Middle School. One of the contractors thought that they could take all the hazardous landfill from around the state and dig a big hole underneath the school and dig it there. Luckily, the trucks were causing so much dust up that they were coating the houses nearby. And when they analyzed it, they realized they were bringing in hazardous waste. But it was a cynicism that the contractors felt, well, they'll never know. We'll put the hazardous waste underneath this school and no one will ever know. And unfortunately for us, they had to tear down the frame of the new school and start all over again after they removed the dirt. So there is a lot of selective environmental racism that goes on as well. But once you transform these neighborhoods, they become productive. We have families living in these houses over the Magic Marker site. You have the neighborhood next door saying, oh my God, you took down that horrible building and you've redeveloped that land and it looks beautiful, and it really brings up urban pride. So you could really literally transform a neighborhood after a night. And we're not looking to gentrify. We got to put that caveat. We're just looking to treat every neighborhood equally. So there's big challenges, but once they come through, once you get the funding, once you get the commitment from the state and the feds, you could really transform neighborhoods and bring up the city's pride, both for that area right there, but even the surrounding neighborhoods.
Thank you. So Mayor Lora, we can now see you. So Thanks.
I'm so excited.
Oh, no, I was going to claim that I had more hair than him, but now you can prove otherwise.
You never get it as tough as you get it from people from Passaic. That's what it is. I have to accept.
So Mayor Lora, I'll ask you the same question. Can you point to any brownfield sites that have been cleaned up and redeveloped in your city that really have helped either that neighborhood or the city as a whole become more socially equitable? Have any of your sites been redeveloped for things like housing and job generators and healthcare facilities, or any of those uses that really help the community?
Definitely. So we have two great examples. We have a private and a public example that I would like to talk about. The first one is the site that we refer to as our old Panaso site, which is an area that was utilized for rubber coating of wires. And it had remained dormant or fallow for so long that it was one of those areas, as I mentioned before, that became conducive for blight and obviously the concern of property values in the area and just the impact on families and communities. But most recently, we were able to get a national firm to invest over $19 million to construct a 111,000 square foot logistics center. These sites, with the environmental issues and areas being remediated by the new owners, have huge impacts because, again, it's job creation. It's an area where people said, why is this ignored and what's going on? And I was happy to work alongside my colleagues on the city council in order to redesignate the area. I mean, ideally, we would have loved a huge impact like a Quest Diagnostic or an Amazon, but to be honest, in areas like Passaic, certain specific areas, it's not always realistic. So designating it not just for offices, but for commercial use like warehouse creates opportunity, perhaps not as many jobs, but the incentive is that, you know what, for the city, we're going to get the land cleaned up. And if we sit there and wait for this huge miracle job creator to come, that land remains fallow, it remains ignored. So sometimes the city has to compromise a bit and use incentives. And I know we'll talk about that later, whether it's tax incentives or opportunities for different developments. But now that site, over 7 acres, is being redeveloped. They're working on it right now, and it's going to be a job creator. But again, I have to highlight the impact that it's going to have in the area in general for the community to see that blighted area, that ignored area, that crime-infested area now be transformed into a job-creating opportunity with a potential national industry that's going to be utilizing it. The second one is more of a public partnership. In our old Dundee Island, a railroad site, we had train tracks there for very long, and we had a challenge to remove it. And there were some contamination issues, of course. But in a partnership with the county, with the state, we were able to apply for grants. And we are now creating the very first ever riverfront park in the history of Passaic County, a county that's named after the Passaic River, because we were able to address those issues, utilize money to clean up the area and partner with a local developer who's going to create housing opportunities, affordable housing opportunities in our east side, our downtown area. And that's extremely exciting because our community hasn't seen a lot of investment on the east side. I mean, we were impacted harshly in the 80s with the fires that impacted over 60 businesses and so many residential areas. And it generally does affect the way people view where they live and the kind of investments that come in. But these are two examples of brownfield areas that we were able to both partner with private and public entities to transform an area that needed investment.
That's great. So, mayors, are there other sites within your cities that, if they were cleaned up and redeveloped, you feel that they would be a catalyst for change? You know, can you point to any of those? I'll start with you, Mayor Gusciora.
Yes. How about all of them? We had 3 city blocks of Roebling buildings. Block 1 and 3 are, block 1 is done. Block 3 is in the process of redevelopment. Block 2, the city owns 7 empty buildings. Most of them are basketball court sizes. And we need that magic developer who will come in and invest in repurposing those buildings. We also have land in the East Trenton Collaborative neighborhood which is very active. The citizens themselves, they had a factory that got toppled, and now DEP and federal dollars are helping us dig it out, and we want to put a skate park in there, and it will just really transform that neighborhood for the better. But Trenton has, we have 1,500 abandoned properties. Most of them are houses. A lot of them need to be torn down. A lot of us live in neighborhoods that would not tolerate something like that. So it really is an injustice for people to live in neighborhoods that have a lot of urban decay, and buildings need to come down or be repurposed. And you just can't get enough investment dollars to make that happen. So there's big challenges, but we look forward in the next 10, 20 years for the potential of Trenton to be really transformed. There's another area where we're probably the only transit hub that's not a transit hub. We just have a train station, but yet we own 60% of the land around the train station. We just need that magic developer to come in and take a chance on the capital city.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Lora, same question for you. Are there any sites within your city that if they were cleaned up and redeveloped would really be a catalyst for change?
Yes, I had mentioned to the fires that impacted our east side, especially down by 8th Street, and we're recently working hard to try to address that specific area, which was impacted obviously by environmental burdens. I think that would transform. It would obviously add to the investment that we received that I mentioned regarding the brand new county park, which we applied for grants through the NJDEP through the 2014 Natural Resource Damage Settlement with Occidental Chemical Corporation. So when we identify these sites and we're able to apply for grants, we're able to work with the state, we're able to partner with individuals, much like Mayor Gusciora, which I got to tell you, I love the approach that he has for Trenton in terms of taking these areas and creating recreation opportunities, obviously housing opportunities, and transit hub development is the way of the future. It's what people are looking for. We have so many young people that are saying, I want to live by transportation. I don't want to drive to work. I don't want to have to drive into the city. I want to be able to go from my home and walk up into a train station or a bus terminal and travel and come back. And I want people to travel here easily and shop around that area. So I've seen 8th Street in our east side really as a location for us to push, to incentivize, but it all comes together. It's so connected, right? It's really hard to pick one area and say, look, we're going to transform it when everything else is falling apart. That's why it's so important to look for every opportunity, whether it's grant, whether it's collaborative efforts with different levels of government, applying, obviously staying on top of what's going on with the NJDEP. So I would go our 8th Street, and then equally with Mayor Gusciora, we have a transit hub opportunity by our Van Houten more affluent area, which is a train station. And we're recently connecting it with a $4 million state-of-the-art bus terminal right on our main avenue, which will go into Bergen County to their train station. And I'm looking to see how we can take land there, available opportunities, not as great as our east side, and ensure that we can remediate any issues and utilize it or capitalize on the proximity to transportation.
Colette, I just wanted to add that I was born in St. Mary's Hospital in Passaic, and I don't know what bodes for the future of that hospital, but we have an abandoned hospital that the entire block, the hospital has really just collapsed and has just remained there and has become an urban eyesore. And that's another thing that even buildings that before were repurposed in recent memory, there's a danger of them getting closed and then being ignored and then becoming part of urban blight. So that's also a real concern for cities of losing more ground than you gain.
So thank you. You both mentioned funding and you both mentioned public-private partnerships. How important are both of those to your city and to redeveloping these brownfield sites?
Actually, absolutely critical. We would have never been able to do the Magic Marker site without the direct intervention with DEP or EPA, federal and state dollars, even DOT coming in. And then and looking for those private corporate grants that we could also repurpose. So there is funding out there. It's hard to really grab the ring, so to speak. But that's always a challenge. Our Roebling Block 2 has not been able to be redeveloped because of the lack of funding, and which is a shame because it's a real big eyesore in the East Ward, and we'd like to see that transformed to be repurposed.
I concur. I mean, obviously, it's so important to utilize opportunities for grants and then private partnerships. You know, I often say it's not a sprint; it's a marathon, and people become so discouraged. And by people, I mean the residents when they're calling upon elected officials to go, "What are you doing with this property?" And going, "Trust us. If we could, we would get it developed and cleaned up tomorrow." No elected official wants to sit on blighted and ignored property. But sometimes I think that we face these unique challenges. The city of Passaic is one of the most densely populated cities in the nation. I think it's number 10. We have a site, Mayor Gusciora has shared, he's born in St. Mary's Hospital, where we were recently able to approve developers for condos and obviously multi-unit structure. But we also have to take into account the density, the population, the parking challenges that we have. And when we don't have support from DET, when we're not getting those grants, when we're not getting funding in order to make sure that the development itself, the impact that it's going to have on the community, will not simply be a property that's now going into the rateable books or lists, but also will benefit in terms of greater parking, aesthetics, opportunities for jobs, you know, mixed uses within the city, especially communities like mine to have residential and commercial on the bottom, help out because they create jobs. They're self-sustained in terms of the communities that they're built in. So I think, and what I was trying to say in the beginning is, we can't be afraid to talk about tax incentives, whether long term, especially when we're talking about land that otherwise we're not going to be able to get developed. But we also have to have that perspective of what's going to be the impact overall on the city and 10 years from now. That's why I think that the checks and balances become so beneficial. There are times that as mayor, I admit to you, I want to run. I'll see a property, I'll see a structure, and I say, let's get it on the books, let's get it developed, let's get it purchased. What do we have to do? What ordinance do we have to change? And I'll admit to you, there are times where from the state and agencies have to go slow down. We want to consider the impact. We want to make sure that we have public input. And I'm gonna be honest with you, and I'm sure that the Mayor Gusciora can also speak to this. It becomes frustrating where we're going, guys, we want to develop, but if we sit here and discuss it for the next 6 months to a year, we're going to lose out on interest. But at the same time, we have to walk the walk and talk the talk. And if we're going to be environmentally conscious and environmentally responsible, we have to make sure that all scenarios are considered. So I think that those are some of the challenges. But without the private and public partnerships, you're not going to get it done in the city. You're not going to get it done in cities like ours or around the state.
Okay. Last question. Both of you have been involved in Brownfields, obviously, from all that you've said and all your enthusiasm. For those mayors who are just getting into dealing with brownfield sites, what advice would you give them?
First, I would get a godfather like Gary Shear, somebody who sits on a budget or appropriations committee. And it's really important to work with the state and county elected officials, but also really galvanize the neighborhoods. There's a tendency to think in the urban area, people are uneducated and they don't care. And you'd be surprised, and I'm sure Mayor Lora has plenty of block captains out there that call you, text you, and really want to get involved. And it's just so heartwarming when you see the neighborhood activism. So it's really important to galvanize both the people themselves to get them to motivate to transform that neighborhood, but also get those partnerships with state and county and national elected officials to help you get the funding, because there's a lot of grants out there, and sometimes City Hall just doesn't have the capability of grabbing those grants like a state or a national figure would be able to help you.
And Mayor Lora, do you have any advice for
So-
mayors who are just embarking on this?
Yeah, I almost feel like just saying ditto because I don't think I could have articulated better than Mayor Gusciora. But I will say this. Obviously, I agree with him. Get a Gary Shayer. I would advise every mayor in the state of New Jersey to get a Gary Shayer. Because
Don't get his head too big.
I know, but I will, obviously you could tell the more experienced one of us in terms of wisdom because he beat me to the punch. Having the relationships, and relationships do matter. Having relationships with your state legislators, the representatives from different state agencies, because they're going to be able to guide you through the process and tell you what has worked and what hasn't worked. And I share with you, having an assemblyman who's the council president and who was the budget chair is a huge asset. He's an amazing mentor and cares about the city. But I would also have to say, have a realistic plan. Because so many individuals are going to come around you, and especially in politics, we have a tendency to say, this is what we desire. But what you desire isn't always the best or more realistic or pragmatic approach. The idea is to get the land dealt with, cleaned up, and to have development that would either create jobs, create recreation opportunities, but definitely positively impact the neighborhood as opposed to what's existing there. To discuss and utilize all available levers, whether redevelopment law or tax incentives, to ensure that you're in it for the long run. And just a personal bit of advice, politics is such a difficult world to be in that we're tempted to try to create solutions for the next election, when in reality, we have to consider the next generation that's coming. And sometimes you might put in the work for the kids in school right now to take up the finished work when they have these positions. If we have that vision in mind, that long-term vision, and say, you know what, I'm going to do 60%, but I know that I can set up the other 40%. I think it's one of those old sayings, right, that, elected officials or politicians think about the next election, but statesmen will think about the next generation. To have that vision will make the biggest difference, and to not be so hard on yourself. You're not elected to resolve every problem and fix anything. There is no panacea approach to the ailments and all of the negative impact and environmental burdens that communities like ours face today. But if we continue forward and do our part, the difference will be made in the long run.
That's great advice. Thank you so much. So as our time together has come to an end, I want to thank Deputy Commissioner Glenn and the mayors of the great cities of Passaic and Trenton. Thank you for your insights, for being champions of environmental justice, and for your presentations. Thanks to Elizabeth Limbrick and New Jersey EDA for your support of the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center at NJIT. And thanks to all of you who have tuned into this webinar. The recording of this webinar will be posted on the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center website. So once again, thank you all so much. I thought this was a terrific hour to spend together, and we really appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.